Two great cities rise out of the American desert, monuments to the audacious idea that millions of people can thrive in a land that receives almost no rain. Phoenix, sprawling across the Sonoran Desert of Arizona, and Los Angeles, spreading along the semi-arid coast of Southern California. Both are enormous, both are improbable, and both drink, at least in part, from the same shrinking source, the Colorado River, a river that is running dry. So here is a question that sounds like idle speculation, but is not. If both cities are drawing from the same dwindling supply, which one hits its limits first? Which one reaches the point where the water can no longer keep up with the demand? It turns out this is not really a matter of guesswork or opinion. When you look at the underlying structure of how each city gets its water, the answer emerges with startling clarity, and it points again and again in the same direction. Phoenix reaches its limits before Los Angeles. The math, in a very real sense, is already done. But the reasons why are surprising. The story is more nuanced than a simple race to empty, and understanding it reveals something profound about how two desert giants have gambled, very differently, on their survival. Let us start with the piece of the math that is most settled of all, the one written not in hydrology, but in law. Both cities draw on the Colorado River, but they do not draw on it as equals. In the strict hierarchy of water rights that governs the river, some claims are senior and some are junior, and when the river falls short, the junior claims are cut first, all the way down, before the senior claims lose a drop. And here the two cities sit on opposite ends of the ladder. The water that flows to the Phoenix area from the Colorado travels through a great canal whose rights are junior, near the bottom of the priority ladder. Decades ago, Arizona accepted that subordinate status in exchange for federal help building that canal. Los Angeles, by contrast, draws on California's Colorado River rights, which are among the most senior on the entire river. Legally protected and cut last. This means that as the Colorado shrinks and the cuts roll out, the Colorado water flowing toward Phoenix is reduced first and deepest, while the Colorado water flowing toward Los Angeles is shielded until the very end. On this single dimension, the outcome is not in doubt. It is settled law, and it favors Los Angeles decisively. But priority on the Colorado is only the beginning of the story, and on its own it would be far too simple. To really understand why Phoenix hits its limits first, you have to look at how diversified each city's water supply actually is, at how many different sources each one can draw from. And this is where the contrast becomes truly striking. Because Los Angeles has spent more than a century assembling one of the most diversified water portfolios of any city on Earth. Los Angeles does not depend on the Colorado River alone. It pulls water from Northern California, hundreds of miles away, through a massive state-built aqueduct system. It pulls water from the Owens Valley and the Eastern Sierra through its own historic aqueduct. Built over a century ago, it draws on the Colorado through yet another aqueduct. It taps local groundwater, and increasingly, it recycles its own wastewater into new supply. The Colorado, for Los Angeles, is just one leg of a many-legged stool. If one source falters, the others can help carry the load. This diversity is not an accident. It is the product of a century of aggressive, sometimes ruthless, water acquisition, a deliberate strategy to never again be at the mercy of any single source. It is worth appreciating just how far Los Angeles reached in building that portfolio, because the scale of it is staggering, and it explains the cushion the city enjoys today. In the early 20th century, Los Angeles engineered one of the most audacious water grabs in American history, constructing an aqueduct that stretched more than 200 miles to drain the Owens Valley. Far to the northeast, of its water, transforming a green agricultural valley into a dry lake bed and permanently altering the fate of an entire region in the process. Later, the city and its neighbors reached out to the Colorado River, hundreds of miles to the east, building a great aqueduct across the desert to bring that water to the coast. And then came the enormous state project that carries water all the way from the wet northern part of California, capturing the runoff of distant mountains and channeling it down the length of the state to the southern cities. Each of these was a monumental undertaking, and together they wove a web of supply so broad that Los Angeles could survive the failure of any one strand. The city essentially ensured itself against drought by refusing to rely on a single river, spreading its dependence across an entire western landscape. It is precisely this hard-won, far-flung diversity that now gives Los Angeles its margin, its ability to absorb a blow to the Colorado without its whole system buckling. Phoenix, by contrast, rests on a narrower and more regional foundation. The Phoenix area draws roughly 40% of its water from the Colorado River through that junior canal. It draws the larger share, around 60%, from two closer rivers, the Salt and the Verde, which are captured and delivered by a long-established local water project, and it uses only a small sliver of groundwater in normal times. Now, at first glance, this looks reasonably diversified too, and in important ways it is. But there is a crucial difference. Nearly all of Phoenix's surface water, both the Colorado and the Salt and Verde, ultimately comes from snowpack in the mountains of the same broad, drying southwest. When the region as a whole grows hotter and drier, when the snows fail across the interior west. More of Phoenix's portfolio is exposed to the very same drought at the very same time. Los Angeles, reaching far to the north and into different watersheds, has spread its bets across a wider geography, so a bad year in one place can be offset by a better year in another. Phoenix's sources, clustered in a single drying region, tend to rise and fall together. Now at this point, honesty demands a serious correction, because the phrase runs out of water is far too strong, and Phoenix's own water managers would object to it vigorously, with good reason. Phoenix is not a city teetering on the edge of dry taps. Far from it. In fact, Phoenix is one of the most sophisticated and well-prepared desert water managers in the entire world, and it deserves real credit for it. Remember that roughly 60% of its water comes from the Salt and Verde rivers, and Phoenix holds high priority, senior rights to that water, making it extremely reliable, the opposite of its junior Colorado supply. The city actually uses only a portion of its total entitlements, leaving itself a genuine cushion. Arizona has banked enormous quantities of water underground, storing away millions of acre-feet in wet years specifically to draw upon during shortages. Phoenix recycles nearly all of its wastewater and is building advanced purification facilities to turn that water into new drinking supply. And Arizona law requires developers to prove a 100-year assured water supply before building. This is not a city stumbling blindly toward catastrophe. It is a city that has planned for drought for decades. That last requirement deserves special attention because it is one of the most far-sighted water laws in the country, and it reveals how seriously Phoenix takes this. In much of Arizona, you cannot simply build a new subdivision on the assumption that water will somehow be found. A developer must demonstrate, and the state must certify, that there is enough water to serve those homes for a full century before the first foundation is poured. Very few places in America impose such a demanding test. It is a legal firewall against the kind of reckless, water-blind growth that has doomed other regions, and it means that the homes already standing in Phoenix rest on supplies that have, in principle, been vetted for the long haul. Phoenix has also driven its per-person water use down substantially over the years, even as its population climbed, wringing more life out of every gallon through conservation. When you combine the reliable senior rights to the Salt and Verde rivers, the vast underground water bank, the near-total recycling of wastewater, the advanced purification plants under construction, and that century-long assured supply requirement, you are looking at a genuinely formidable set of defenses. Anyone who pictures Phoenix as a naive boomtown sleepwalking into disaster has the story badly wrong. This is a city that saw the desert clearly and armed itself against it. What we really mean is that Phoenix runs into its binding constraints first, the hard walls that force a reckoning. And here, we arrive at perhaps the most concrete piece of already done math in this entire story. It concerns groundwater, the water beneath the ground. A few years ago, the state of Arizona ran a detailed computer model of the groundwater beneath the greater Phoenix area, projecting supply and demand a full 100 years into the future. And that model reached a landmark conclusion. The region had effectively reached the limit of the groundwater physically available to support new growth. In plain terms, the math said there was not enough groundwater left in the ground to keep approving new subdivisions that would depend on it. As a result, Arizona stopped approving certain new developments that relied solely on pumping groundwater in the Phoenix area. This was not a forecast or a fear. It was a calculated, official conclusion that a hard limit had been reached, a line drawn by arithmetic. That is the math already done. It does not turn off anyone's tap today. But it does something almost as consequential. It caps a certain kind of growth, telling parts of the sprawling desert metropolis that they cannot keep expanding the way they always have. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand what groundwater has meant to Arizona's growth. For generations, the easy path to building a new community on the desert fringe was simply to drill down and pump water from the aquifer beneath, treating that ancient underground reserve as if it were an inexhaustible bank account. But it is not inexhaustible. That groundwater accumulated over thousands of years, and much of it is not meaningfully replenished on any human timescale. Once it is pumped out, it is effectively gone, and the emptied earth can even compact and sink. Arizona recognized this danger decades ago and passed pioneering laws to manage its groundwater in its most populated areas, but those protections cover only a fraction of the state, and even within the managed zones, the fundamental arithmetic eventually catches up. The recent modeling made that arithmetic official and undeniable. In the greater Phoenix area, the practice of endlessly drilling new wells to support new sprawl has hit its mathematical end. There simply is not enough groundwater left to keep doing it. Future growth, if it happens, will have to be supported by renewable supplies, by recycled water and carefully managed river deliveries. Not by mining an aquifer that has finally been declared, in effect, tapped out for the purpose of new expansion. And this points to the true meaning of Phoenix reaching its limits first. It is not primarily about existing residents losing their water. It is about growth, about margin, about how much room each city has left to keep expanding before it slams into a wall. Phoenix is the beating heart of one of the fastest growing regions in the entire United States. A place where new subdivisions have marched across the desert for decades at a breathtaking pace. That relentless growth is precisely what drives a city hardest against its water limits, because every new home, every new neighborhood demands more water in a place that has very little to spare. Phoenix is growing fast in a harsher desert with a junior claim on its most vulnerable river, and with a groundwater ceiling that has already been formally reached. Los Angeles, growing more slowly, sitting on senior river rights and buffered by its remarkably diversified supply, simply has more margin, more cushion, more room to absorb the shocks. So the wall arrives for Phoenix first, not as a dry tap, but as a limit on how much bigger and how much more it can become. This is a subtle but vital distinction, and it changes how we should think about the whole comparison. A city does not usually experience its water limits as a sudden catastrophe. It experiences them as a slow narrowing of possibilities, subdivisions that cannot be approved, industries that must look elsewhere, development that stalls, water bills that climb, lawns that give way to gravel, and hard conversations about what the region is allowed to become. For Phoenix, that narrowing has already begun, visible in the halted groundwater developments and the anxious planning around the shrinking Colorado. It is the leading edge of the limit, arriving not as thirst, but as the closing of doors once wide open. The water that sustains the people already there is, by and large, secure and well managed. What is being constrained is the future, the next wave of growth, the assumption that the desert metropolis could expand forever. And because Phoenix grows faster and pushes harder against that boundary, it feels the narrowing much sooner and more sharply than its coastal rival, whose doors remain open a little wider. In fairness, though, we must not swing too far the other way and imagine that Los Angeles is invincible, floating serenely above the crisis, because that too would be false. Los Angeles has its own serious vulnerabilities, and they are growing. Its water from Northern California flows through an aging, ecologically troubled network of channels and pumps. And those deliveries have become increasingly unreliable, slashed dramatically in dry years to protect fragile ecosystems, and because the snowpack that feeds them is itself dwindling and melting too early. Its historic aqueduct from the eastern Sierra is constrained by environmental obligations and by the same regional drying. And crucially, the agency that supplies much of Southern California's imported water, holds a junior position within California's own internal hierarchy, meaning that even California's senior Colorado rights do not fully shield the coastal cities. When deep cuts come, Los Angeles feels them too. So Los Angeles has margin? Yes. But it does not have immunity. It has bought itself more time than Phoenix, but time is not the same as safety, and the coastal metropolis faces a long, difficult reckoning of its own. In fact, some of the very diversification that protects Los Angeles carries hidden fragilities. The great artery that brings water from the north depends on a vast, aging network of levees and channels in a low-lying delta region, a system that experts warn is vulnerable to earthquakes, floods, and rising seas, any of which could disrupt deliveries to the south for an extended period. The water from the eastern Sierra comes with a heavy environmental burden because the diversions of the past caused real ecological harm, and the city is now legally obligated to send some of that water back to heal the damage it once caused, reducing what reaches the taps. And the coastal region's continued growth, while slower than Phoenix's, still adds pressure to a system already stretched. Los Angeles, in other words, has not escaped the reckoning. It is merely arranged to meet it later, and perhaps on somewhat better terms. Its portfolio is broad, but every piece of that portfolio is under its own strain, and the day may come when several of those strains bite at once. The margin is real, but it is not infinite, and the coastal giant would be foolish to mistake its head start for a permanent reprieve. So in what sense, exactly, is the math already done? It is done in the sense that the fundamental structure of the two cities' water situations reliably orders them, placing Phoenix's reckoning before Los Angeles's. The priority of their river rights is fixed by law. The diversity of their supplies is a matter of infrastructure built over generations, not easily or quickly changed. The harshness of their respective climates and the pace of their growth are known quantities, and the groundwater limit beneath Phoenix has already been formally calculated and declared. Add all of these settled factors together, and they point, consistently and from multiple independent directions, to the same conclusion: Phoenix hits its binding constraints sooner. The math is done not because someone has computed the exact year a tap runs dry, which no one can honestly do, but because the underlying structure that governs the outcome is already in place, already measured, already pointing one way. It is less a countdown than a diagnosis, and yet the phrase "runs out of water" remains genuinely misleading if we take it too literally, so let us be very clear about what is and is not being claimed. Neither Phoenix nor Los Angeles is going to simply go dry, with faucets sputtering and residents fleeing en masse. Both are wealthy, sophisticated, deeply invested cities with powerful tools at their disposal, and both will fight, adapt, conserve, recycle, and re-engineer their way forward for a very long time. What the math actually predicts is not apocalypse, but constraint, that Phoenix will feel the squeeze first and hardest, that its growth will be checked sooner, that its choices will narrow earlier, and that it will be forced to confront the limits of the desert before its coastal rival has to. The difference between the two cities is not one of survival versus doom. It is a difference of margin, of how much slack each has left before the hard choices become unavoidable. Phoenix has less slack, and it is using it up faster. Step back, and these two cities become a fascinating natural experiment in how to survive in a drying land. Two different bets on the same brutal problem. Los Angeles made its bet more than a century ago, choosing aggressive, far-reaching diversification, reaching out across hundreds of miles to seize water from distant valleys and rivers, building an empire of aqueducts so that it would never depend on any single source. That strategy was often ruthless and left scars on the places it took water from, but it bought the city an enormous cushion of resilience that is paying off now in the age of scarcity. Phoenix made a different bet, tying much of its future to a nearby canal it obtained by accepting junior status, and to the rivers and aquifers of its own drying region, while pioneering its own remarkable tools of conservation, banking, and recycling. Each city's history is now its destiny. The choices made generations ago about which water to chase and which bargains to accept are determining, right now, which desert giant runs into the wall first. In the end, the claim that Phoenix runs out of water before Los Angeles is true in the way that matters most, even if the words are dramatic. Phoenix reaches its binding limits first, its river share cut first by the iron logic of seniority, its growth capped first by a groundwater ceiling already calculated and reached. Its margins thinnest because it grows fastest in the harshest desert on the narrowest base. Los Angeles, senior on the river and diversified across half a state, holds more cushion and buys more time. That ordering is not a guess. It is written into the law, the geography, and the infrastructure, and in that sense the math truly is already done. But the deeper truth is that both cities are extraordinary feats of engineered survival, and neither is simply doomed to go dry. The real question the desert is asking is not which city runs out, but which one learns fastest to live within the limits the land actually imposes. And Phoenix, forced to the edge first, pressed hardest and soonest against the wall, may yet end up doing something remarkable, showing the entire thirsty West how a great city learns, at last, to thrive on less.